Welcome to On the Table with Ashley, a podcast where I explore ways in which we can lead more fulfilling lives and amplify human connection by increasing our curiosity and communicating with less judgment and more respect. My guest today, Jenn Drummond, was in a car accident in 2018, and rescue workers said she should not have survived, but she did. After this horrific accident, Jenn realized you don't get to choose when you leave this life, but you absolutely get to choose how you live it. With this newfound gratitude and awareness, Jenn took on a Guinness World Record and became the first woman to climb the 7-second summits, which she'll tell us more about. Jenn has a lot of great taglines, and one of my favorites is her desire to live a life of significance, not just success. After she broke the world record in her summiting of the 7-second summits, Jenn wrote Break Proof: 7 Strategies to Build Resilience and Achieve Your Life Goals, which we will discuss in detail on this episode. Jenn is also a successful entrepreneur, mother of 7 children, motivational speaker, and host of her own podcast, Seek Your Next Summit. You can find Jenn in lots of places: on her website, Jenn Drummond, JennDrummond.com, or on LinkedIn, Jenn-Drummond, Instagram and X at the Jenn Drummond, YouTube at Jenn Drummond, Facebook at Jenn Drummond Utah, and TikTok, the Jenn Drummond. Welcome, Jenn.
It's a mouthful. Thank you for having me today. Woohoo!
Thank you for being here.
Yes.
I always like to start just hearing a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of kid you were when you were young.
Yeah. So I grew up in Michigan, smitten with the mitten for sure. And I'm the oldest of 3 children. I was definitely always energetic, big into sports, because in my house, we played sports, then you didn't have to do chores because you're busy and being active. So that was an easy trade-off for me. Just always on the go. Like, I'm high octane for sure.
So I got to meet your mom a couple months ago before you went on an amazing trip, which we'll talk about, to Kilimanjaro with 3 of your children and one of my children. And she told me this story about you, about one time you wanted to ride your bike to, I think it was to your grandparents' house, yes. And they lived a couple blocks away, so not super far, but you were young. Yeah. And your mom said, well, you need to be able to ride around. You had like a circular driveway. You need to be able to ride around the driveway however many times before I'll let you go down the road. And she said, you just kept at it, and you would fall and get up and fall and get up. And you had this determination, it sounds like, from a very young age, and maybe it's genetic. I don't know. But do you remember that about yourself?
I don't know if you remember it about yourself because you're not aware,
yeah.
Right? Like, you're just yourself at that age.
Yeah.
But I do remember my parents telling the story,
okay.
Right? And I do remember wanting to go to Grandma's house because Grandma had gum and we were not allowed to chew gum at my parents' house. And so it was one of those things where I'm like, I want to go to Grandma's because I love chewing gum, and it was not allowed. And I fell a handful of times, scraped up my D's. My dad was out there with me in the beginning. And he's like, you need to come in because Mom's going to be mad that I'm letting you to continue and you're all scraped up. And I wasn't quitting. I'm like, no, I'm not coming in. I'm going to figure this out. And so I did.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that has stuck with you. We'll hear more about that.
Yes.
So I usually ask my guests what they think led them to their area of expertise. In your case, I've read your book and I know your story, but can you tell our listeners more about how you found yourself to create and then achieve a world record climbing of the 7-second summits, and maybe explain sort of what that is, become a motivational speaker, and create a super inspirational brand around all of your accomplishments?
That's a load. I think it's an accumulation of experiences that transcribe into who we are today. But I was a gymnast at a really young age. And when you compete competitively in gymnastics, you have whatever your score could absolutely maximum be. But the chances of getting that are about slim to none.
Yeah.
But as close as you can get to that is the win. So you just don't want zeros. So even if you didn't hit it perfect or you didn't do everything exactly as it was, anything was better than a 0 and it helped your score. Well, you start with that foundation as a child. You have an idea of where you want to go, but because you're not there, you don't quit. You're like, okay, well, whatever. Anything times 0 is 0, but anything times something gives me some momentum and gets me closer. And so I think because I gave myself that flexibility in not being perfect, you actually go pretty far in a lot of your pursuits.
Yeah. And then talk a little bit about, so I mentioned the car accident.
Yep.
So can you just tell, and you talk about this a little bit in your book too, but can you just talk about that experience and then how that transformed into this pretty meaty goal?
Yeah. So I was definitely at a stage in my life where I was struggling with my identity, if I had to be 100% honest. I had moved to Utah in 2015 with the kids just for a new active lifestyle. And I had hired myself out of a job. So now all of a sudden I was this stay-at-home mom. And it was a whole bunch of my friends growing up dream. And I was kind of programmed like, hey, be this stay-at-home mom and it's going to be amazing and blah, 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 blah. And I'm living that story. I'm like, this isn't as amazing as they told me it was going to be. Like, oh my gosh. And you kind of feel guilty and shameful because I'm so lucky to be in this spot, but it's really not me. And what do I do? And I'd gone to a yoga retreat in October and they were talking about like surrender and relaxing and all this stuff that I was like, surrender's for weakness, like who surrenders? You don't surrender. You take things to the end. And I read that book, The Surrender Experiment.
Okay.
And I journaled the word surrender for about 2 months till I finally realized it was a superpower. Mm. And it's funny because I went on this retreat like in the middle of October, and then December 18 of 2018, I was driving on the highway and I was coming up fast onto a semi truck because I was paying attention to the reservoir on the side of the road. And then all of a sudden when my eyes got back on the road, I was like, I need to move over. I'm done. And when I went to move over, the semi kind of bumped out his second trailer. It hit my passenger side. And like instantly, I started negotiating with death. I'm like, okay, like I'll do something significant. Like, let me be here. I don't want to die. And it was almost like that book where I studied the word. Now I had to live the word. Yeah. And I knew that I wasn't going to be strong enough to overpower the accident. And so I literally was like, okay, if I surrender, maybe I have a chance of surviving and I need to roll with this car. Mm. And I was with it enough and stayed in the pursuit enough to be like, I'm going to roll once. I'm going to roll twice. I'm going to roll 3 times. I don't have enough momentum to roll forward again. Now I'm going to roll sideways. And I rolled sideways a handful of times and then was hanging from the median upside down. And somebody came and they were yelling, are you okay? Are you okay? And I could hear it, but I wasn't registering it. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't like, is that me or what? Or what's going on? And then they peeled back the windshield and we grabbed eyes. And he goes, are you okay? And so then I'm like, asking myself, am I okay? Based on his facial expression, I am not okay. Yeah. So I closed my eyes, and I still do this to this day now. I closed my eyes and I wiggled my fingers and toes. Mm. I'm like, I can feel my fingers and toes. I can feel my fingers and toes. Like, I'm okay. I'm the only one that can tell you if I'm okay or not. This outside world's going to tell you every way that you're not, but I get to decide if I am. And that really was the line in the sand for me. Of saying, okay, I'm here. Life isn't forever. What am I doing? Yeah.
I just got the chills when you were telling that story. I mean, it is so crazy. And also how interesting that this retreat that you went on before may have been part of what saved your life. I mean,
yeah, right.
How things connect is totally insane. So then how does that become this like audacious goal?
Yeah. So like 2019 all of a sudden became this year of the bucket list. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What do I even like? I mean, anybody who's listening who's had children, there is this season where you don't even know. Right. Like I ate chicken nuggets. If you asked me to go out to dinner, I'd be like, anything that wasn't chicken nuggets would be fantastic. I don't know. So I really started getting into like who I was, because before the accident, I really looked outside of me to say, is this good or is this bad or am I whatever? And after the accident, I'm like, whoever's judging me is going to die around the same time I am. So why does it matter what their opinion is? It matters what my opinion is. And like, I bought a journal, and I would journal in my journal in different color inks. I'd be like, oh, I don't want to journal in red. It feels like I'm correcting myself. I don't want to journal in green. I feel like I have to write fast. I want to journal in purple. It's like playful and fun. And it's like just silly things that you learn about yourself.
Yeah.
And I realized like this life is truly a gift, and it's up to us to play and experience and explore. So on that list of things was climb a mountain. And I asked friends into mountaineering, and they're like, climb Ama de Blanc. Okay, I hadn't heard of it, but they're like, oh, it's this gorgeous mountain in Nepal, like blah, 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 blah. So I'm like, okay, perfect. So I'm training for Ama de Blanc. If everybody listening remembers, COVID enters the scene in 2020, so I'm not going anywhere. And in fact, now I'm homeschooling 7 children because the world shut down and we became teachers. And so one day, one of my kids was struggling with his math homework. And I'm doing that parent pep talk, like, we do hard things. You've got this math assignment, blah, blah, blah. And my kid looks up at me and he goes, Mom, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? And it like took me a minute, like, I'm a dumb blonde. Ama de Blanc, honey, not I'm a dumb blonde. But thank you. Finish your homework. We'll look at Everest. And so then we did. And then he went to bed. And then I was still looking at Everest. And I thought, this kid thinks Everest is the hardest thing in the whole world. I'm going to climb it. And I'm going to show him whatever our Everest is, we're capable of summiting. So then that evolved to Everest. And then my coach upped it to the 7-second summits.
Okay, so that was your coach's idea.
That was my coach's idea. Yes.
Okay.
And when he presented it to me, I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he explained it to me and he's like, hey, they're harder than the first 7. It's been done by one male. And probably the sinking like hook line for me was 7 continents, 7 mountains, 7 children. Sounds like a jackpot. And to me it did, because I would be able to explore the world. I'd be able to challenge myself physically and mentally and spiritually. And I would set a world record, which was a really cool thing. And it felt worthy of pursuit.
Yeah. So how long did it take you?
Yeah. I did my first climb in December of 2020. And I did my last climb in June of 2023. So about 2.5 years.
Okay. And you do, and we're going to talk about the book. We're going to get into that. You do talk in the book about all the twists and turns, some of them COVID related, so travel restrictions, some of them weather related, some of them political. I mean, all kinds of things that you had to navigate, and you had to make some changes. And part of that is like part of your lessons, you know, for people to take away. So there are so many lessons in the book that really resonated with me. And one I've heard you talk about a lot is people over peaks, which I think is a really important lesson. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that, but because people can find that discussion in other places, I thought we could talk about something that to me was probably the most stuck out to me the most, because I think it's where most of us spend a lot of time, which is what you call the messy middle.
Yeah.
So you write in the book, the messy middle is where dreams go to die. It's the sometimes silent, unseeable quagmire everyone sees themselves in, but rarely names or recognizes. This is where most people quit and give up being break-proof. So you describe the place like this. You're inexplicably losing momentum and you don't know why. Adrenaline is gone and frustration is up. You're questioning your path and whether to lower your expectations for yourself, and you don't know how much further it is to reach your goal. Maybe this resonated with me most of all because it's not glamorous. No. It's not really appreciated by society, but it is the key to success. At least my experiences is the key to success in all things, like professionally and personally. So you have this advice, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about it. 1 is expect the mess. 2 is let go of your emotions. 3 is call it what it is. So can you talk about the messy middle, both your experience on the mountains and your views for us and how to sort of translate that in life? And then also let's get into like break proof, which is the name of your book and what that means. Okay. Because I think the messy middle is actually a place where you really have to practice that a lot.
Yeah. So break proof, the title came to be because we break. We're human. The human experience is to break. And in that break, if we pause, we have proof. What's working, what's not working, what did we learn? And when you take that information, now you can start reorganizing and go forward and maybe not break in that point because you realized, hey, ABC caused XYZ. Take out one of those variables. Now we don't have this problem. So this book isn't about never breaking. It's about what do you do when you break and how do you prevent it or how do you use that lesson to propel yourself forward and still climb the mountain? So that covers that part of that question. The next part of the question is the messy middle. Yeah, the messy middle is where all the enthusiasm has worn off.
Yeah.
Right. And the end is nowhere in sight. And you are just in this quicksand of life, wondering, am I making progress? Is this working? I want feedback. I don't really understand. And I truly believe that the longer you can hold your own in the messy middle, the more success you're going to be able to achieve. And it's learning how to sit in that space of discomfort, of uncertainty, of obstacles, and be able to still continue and go forward, right? I mean, I built a business and everybody has a business plan, right? This is what it's going to look like. And here's what's going to happen and da. And then you're open for 3 months and you're like, or not. It is not going to go like my business plan said. But I think you set stuff aside when you build a business to prepare when things don't go like what you expected, right? You're like, okay, well, I have this cushion to cover that setback or whatever. But it's rarely the setbacks that we anticipate that take us out, right? It's the unforeseen. However, the cushion that we set aside for the setbacks that we thought were going to happen and didn't now provides us enough bandwidth to continue on the pursuit and handle what really showed up, right? And I feel the sooner that you can stabilize the messy middle, the better off you are.
And what are some tips for recognizing where you are in the messy middle and having sort of that staying power and that reflection to say, okay, this is how I move forward? Because another thing you talk about in the book is it's not always linear. It's not always straight ahead. Mm-hmm. Like on the mountain, sometimes you have to go back to move forward.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the messy middle too, is like knowing when you need to change the route to get to where you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, I play poker with my kids, right? And people are like, what? And I play poker with my kids because you can be playing Texas Hold'em and they have pocket queens. It's fun when you have pocket queens because it's so rare and you're so excited. But then on the flip, right, it has a king and a 6 and a 10. Well, there's a pretty good chance now somebody has a pair of kings. So your queens are no longer these magical cards that you wish they could be. And the person that gets themselves in trouble keeps playing the queens like the king isn't on the table.
Yeah.
The person who wins learns to fold that and be like, hey, this wasn't my game. I need to pick up another, the next round. And so just learning how to quit is such an important skill.
Yeah.
Or maybe just be like, I'm sitting out this round and we're going to see what we learn and go around the next round, right? And watch how everybody else plays their game. The messy middle for me is very much my instinct is to like make it even more messy, right? So like if you step in a puddle and the river is perfectly clean and you can see everything, you step in that puddle, now you kick up all that mud.
Yeah.
Right? The best thing you can do is stop kicking up mud. Just stay there, let it settle, and figure out what your next step is. But what you want to do is take a few more steps, which then just causes everything a longer time to stabilize.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I get in the messy middle in the middle of the afternoon because I get hangry, right? I ate lunch, it's not quite dinner, and I'm starting to get grouchy. And it's that awareness of, oh, wait, I'm not showing up how I want to. Oh, wait, things aren't really going quite as smooth. The faster you become aware of that situation, the better you can fix it and then show up the way you want to show up.
So awareness
is
probably one of the biggest things. And then is it reflection like, what's next?
I mean, I think it's stabilizing.
Okay.
Right. I would say like awareness, and then you stabilize and say, okay, what is causing this? What can we turn off? What can we turn on? What do we need to do to fix this thing? And then once you get stabilized again, the water becomes clear to take the next step, whatever that is. And sometimes it's up the mountain.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's, hey, we don't have the resources to get up the mountain and all the way back home. Because guess what? The summit's halfway.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So you have to be able to get up there and get all the way back.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't look like you're able to do that, go back to base camp, go back to the boardroom, go back to the bedroom, and now discuss everything that's going on, re-energize, refuel, get the tools that you need, the people on your team, whatever that looks like, and then continue to climb the mountain a few days later.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a year later. I think one of them you went back.
Yeah, because mountains have climbing seasons.
Yeah.
So if you don't summit in May, you have to wait till the next May to go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I just wrote down a couple of quotes that I loved from the book.
Yeah, perfect.
So one of them is, support isn't always cloaked in praise. And I think it's, especially today, where I feel like our society is so focused on like immediate gratification and great job and all of these things, that sometimes it's important to know that, that it's people actually giving you either hard feedback, or the world is just giving you that feedback. Like, your product isn't successful, or you didn't do well on a test, or, it could be a million different things, is actually what you need to take in to sort of move forward. And it, in retrospect, is support, because it moves you in the right direction. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to you and how that showed up on the mountain?
Yeah. So I think we're a species that interacts with one another, and anything you're doing is a result of other people being on your team. And if you only put cheerleaders on your team, you are hurting yourself and whatever you're doing. So when you're climbing a mountain, it's very important that you're building a team that gets to the top, right? So I'm this tiny person. I can't carry a lot of weight. Even if I got 5 pounds heavier with pure muscle, that exponential factor is just not going to play out. Yeah. But if I put a guy on my team that's 6 foot, 220, now all of a sudden we can leverage each other's strengths, and you hire out your weakness, right? You need somebody on your team that is going to call A is A. And you can't have everybody on your team that way, because you're going to lose momentum and energy and all the inspiration, but you need somebody on your team that's doing that for you. And because they're doing that for you, it allows you to be in the journey more fully present, because you have somebody that's keeping an eye, that's going to call a spade a spade. Yeah. So I think it's very important that when you're building teams or when you're doing big things, you're aware of who's in these different roles, and they're aware that they're in those roles for you too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things I've seen just working in companies, is that executives often tend to surround themselves with yes people. And that's super dangerous.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels good in the moment.
Right. Exactly. Until you're like up the hill a little bit longer, you're like, oh, we missed that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a really good takeaway. Let's see. I like this one too. Another one of I would say, your kind of mantras is, the start doesn't define the journey. And so this is another quote from your book. The start doesn't define the journey. It's one step in the process, and one that can be recovered from in the event of less than ideal beginnings. And as we were talking about, this happened with you on the mountain a number of times. You had there was illness or weather issues, or you had political issues where you basically just had to leave. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that? I think it's important too, because sometimes it's easy to give up early, and we shouldn't. We should just recognize, okay, this was not an ideal beginning, but there's a path forward.
Yeah. I've learned this lesson first in running half marathons, right? You have that first mile is not good. And there's a part of it, it's okay, let's just call it, right? Never mind, we'll sign up for another race. But as you stay with that race, you realize like there's a whole bunch of people that paced themselves wrong and went out too hard. Yeah. And now they're going to crash at mile 8. There's a whole bunch of people that on mile 13, like are done. And because you stayed with it, all of a sudden you start plucking people and doing better. So having some of those types of stories on speed dial really, really helps, because like, okay, it didn't start like I wanted, but that doesn't mean it didn't start okay. Right. And can we make up ground? This story came into play big time in the book for me because I had a mountain in Russia. And so this was in September of 2021. I had curated perfect gear because it was a technical climb. So I needed to have the dexterity to be able to do the pursuit. And of course, I show up in Moscow and my bags are nowhere to be found. And so I'm sitting there and the guide is like, we need to go now. The weather is now. We either climb now or you go home. And I thought about going home, but the universe had my back and had the monitor go off again. I'm like, I can't hear another sound in this airport because it's just so loud. And I'm like going to cry because I've been traveling for way too many hours. And so then we went to a rental store and we had to rent gear, which everybody knows that nightmare of a story. And I adjusted my expectations. I'm like, you know what? We're not going to summit. But every step I take on that mountain, I'm learning something. And I'm going to be able to have that beta. So when I come back, I'm going to know, did I really pick the best gloves or socks or layers or how this all works? And luck would have it that we still summited. Okay. I come home 6 months later, that country closes and you are still not allowed to go there as of this recording. And so I wouldn't have been able to have the record if I was waiting for this like perfect scenario. Yeah. And I sit there and think like, how many times does that play in our real life? Yeah. Right. I mean, it was just a fascinating example. Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you tell some amazing stories, some extremely trying, some very frightening, from losing friends on the mountain or to the mountain, maybe I should say, trudging through wet snow like quicksand and enduring wind speeds and whiteout conditions that presented major obstacles. Can you share a story or two that didn't make it into the book?
Oh, yeah. Let's think about that. Stories that didn't make it into the mountain are maybe like a lot of them made it in, but they got watered down, right? Like the editors are just, we don't need to get into this much detail. Or maybe I was a little bit more friendly about some of the people in the book that behind the scenes I'm not as friendly about. Some of the stuff like happened so extreme that if you put it in the book, people just wouldn't even be able to comprehend it. And so it was just really interesting from that standpoint. And there's so much boring, right? The book highlights like the moments. Yeah. The boring parts, which is like 80% of climbing these mountains because you're waiting for the weather to line up and this to line up and that to line up. I mean, those stories of learning how to sit in solitude by yourself and not be able to run or do or like distract yourself from yourself. Those were some hard moments.
Well, it's kind of the messy middle.
It is the messy middle for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Other than the messy middle and the things that we've talked about, is there one or two takeaways from the book that you would like listeners to remember?
Yeah. I would say that being kind to myself makes me stronger. And I'm guilty of this, but when things get hard and I do something wrong that causes problems, my first thing is like, oh, Jennifer, like, why'd you do that? Right. And that doesn't add good energy to the space and it doesn't solve anything into the space. And so the quicker I caught those moments and just said, I'm trying. Yeah. Like I'm on the mountain, I'm in the game and it's not going to be perfect and we're going to be fine. And that's okay. And so just learning that when you're actually kind to yourself, the environment's hard enough. Don't make yourself add to that extremeness and see what you can do to mitigate that for sure. And then like understanding that it's fascinating. None of the Everest stories got in the book because we were talking about the 7-second summits and I climbed Everest to train for K2. And so when I was on Everest, one of the big takeaways for me on that mountain was I was on the top for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. I trained 1,238 hours for 10 minutes on the top. Yeah. And I think that's so many of our goals. And how do you know it's your goal? It's because when you get to the top, you're not even enjoying it and you're trying to think of what the next thing is that you're going to chase. And you realize that the goals give us direction. They give us a line to say, yes, I'm going to say yes to this and it's going to bring me closer to the goal, or I'm going to say no to this and it's going to bring me farther away from the goal. And truly, the goal just lets our journey unfold. And it's the journey where we live our lives.
I totally agree. I mean, you hear so many stories of people who achieve like at great levels and they have this like amazing, like an Olympic gold, or to have revenue of whatever, a public company with this, this many employees. And then they achieve the goal and they're depressed.
Yeah.
Because it's actually not achieving the goal. It is the journey. And then it's making sure you have another goal. And the goals don't all need to be these high achievement goals. It's really like what you're talking about, being kind to yourself. And so the name of my brand, Amatand, which translates to take care of your soul in French. And I just think it's like so fundamental. And I always said to my kids from when they were very young, you have to learn to love yourself first. You can't really love anybody else until you love yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think it's being kind to yourself is loving yourself too. Mm-hmm. So I think that is such a good takeaway for everybody, for all of us. And it's work. Like we have to remind ourselves, like we're not always going to be good at it.
Right. Or we have to remind ourselves that there's seasons.
Yeah.
Right. So when I got done with the pursuit, I was interviewed a ton of times on different platforms and everybody was like, well, what's next? What's next? And I'm like, I'm actually doing nothing.
Yeah.
I'm celebrating what is.
Yeah.
Because if I don't teach my kids how to have a season of winter, who is?
Right.
And so this next year, it's a season of just being. And for those of us that are addicted to doing, that's hard.
Yeah.
Right. But it's so important because we're human beings, not human doings.
Right. Yeah. And you have to be thoughtful about what comes next instead of just running to the next thing. So what did it feel like when you summited that last of the 7-second summits? You knew that you had broken a world record. Like, what does that feel like?
Yeah. So like the 10 steps before you go, it's funny. You actually take them really slow.
Yeah.
Because, when you first set a goal, I think there's a point where like, we'll see,
yeah.
Who knows, right? Whatever. And then when you're halfway through the thing, you realize like, okay, this could really happen. And then when you're getting close to the end, you're like, wow, this is going to be done. And it's given me so much direction and purpose and ideas. And like the whole thing has been so much more magical than I thought. So I'm like 10 steps away. I'm like, okay, I just need to be really conscientious of these because I'm never going to be able to take these 10 steps again.
Yeah.
And so I step and I step and I step. And then I get to the last one. And I do this huge inhale. And on that inhale, everything disappeared. There's no time. There's no sound. There's no color. There's no separation. Like I am that moment of awe. And I held on to that as long as I could. And then as I exhaled and things started to return again, and you kind of, you do a few rounds of that and you realize like these moments of awe are available all the time. And it's truly just amazing that we're able to do anything that we're able to do.
Yeah.
And it was just so humbling and so inspiring. And so it was every emotion at once.
Yeah.
And those are the moments that you might only get a couple of those in your life. And that's okay.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
It was awesome.
Okay. So you said you're having a winter, but you took your children and one of my children to go climb Kilimanjaro.
I did.
In your winter.
Yes, I did.
So, can you tell us a little bit what it was like to expose your sons, or, not all of your children, but 3 of your sons to climbing, and what you learned from that experience that perhaps had been different from other trips?
Yeah. So I think all of us, right? We have this success, but really where the success becomes significant is when you can share it with somebody else and be like, this was so impactful for me that I want you to just have a sliver of the taste of it.
Yeah.
And so we did Kilimanjaro, which is it's a very safe mountain. It's very doable. It's hard enough at their ages and levels to be challenging, but not so hard that it's like they lose their soul and wonder who they are. And that mountain is so special to me because that culture is so beautiful. And so here we have these boys, and the first day is the hardest day. So they're all thinking like, oh my God, what did I get into? And you're watching the evolution of their thoughts, and they're struggling. And then you have these guys who have nothing, or carrying 40 pounds, wearing Crocs. Our guys are all decked out in like top end gear, and they're singing songs and they're having fun. And it's so magical because then at each night we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Look at how important enthusiasm is in what you're doing. Like, let's compare what our thoughts were compared to what their thoughts were and how those experiences were different. And so then by the end of this journey, like, our boys are shy and quiet, like they were moving to the music. They knew the words to the song and they got into it. And at the end, we had to tip them, and they realized like how little those guys made, which even solidified that, like, how are these guys so happy? Like, my son was, Mom, we need to bring these guys back and at least have them work at Panda Express. They'd be so happy at Panda Express. He's like, they would make that in an hour instead of a week, right? I mean, it was just so fun. And for them to have to do something that was hard, that they can't manipulate themselves out of, that they can't call and be like, someone saved me, that they had to dig deep, do the thing. And you know what works? Well, they're not sure they even are really happy with what they just did until a few months later. And they get that confidence of, man, I dug deep.
Yeah.
And I can.
And I did that.
And I did that.
Yeah.
Like, I was reading a book the other day, and the person was talking about how they were so proud that they climbed Kilimanjaro. Jacob's like, I climbed Kilimanjaro. How could he write a book about that? And I'm like, see? Like, that's awesome.
And there are so few people in the world who have done it.
Right.
I mean, it is really special. And they had to go through the messy middle.
They did. They had to go through the messy middle. And they were looking at me like, my mom let me sign up for this, and we are not friends. She is never letting me go on a trip with you again. I'll make sure of it.
What an amazing experience, honestly.
That's awesome.
Okay. You do not strike me as being afraid of much, if anything. And you seem like what you are afraid of, you wouldn't let stand in your way if you had a goal anyway. Can you share a time you were afraid of something, either on or off the mountain, and how you pushed through it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we were on the mountain for Mount Logan this last time, we got into a storm that we didn't anticipate. And when you're on these mountains, you are trying to do everything to stay safe. And one of the things to stay safe is to make sure that your tent won't rip, because your tent is like this tiny piece of fabric that's keeping you alive. And this storm was about 6 days long. And there was 14 hours of it where the guide, my friend, and I were in full-on gear, because we're like, okay, if this tent rips, which it has a decent chance of doing right now, considering what we're in, we are going to try to get to this point, and you need to have everything on because no one's coming to rescue us until the storm is over. And so you're sitting there thinking, okay, like, I mean, I had my phone out and I was like writing messages to people so that if it did happen and someone cracked my phone, they could have like little notes of who I wanted to do things to. And those moments just, they humble you, right? They remind you that I don't get to choose when I die, but I sure get to choose how I live. And am I really living? And am I leaving an impact? And if I die today, what would people say? Yeah. And those reflection points, like, if you can put those into your life on a yearly basis, or less frequently or more frequently, depending on who you are, I think that changes how you live.
Well, it's interesting because I'm working on preparing for a couple of episodes on death and dying that I'm going to air in September to honor my father, who died in September, 10 years ago in September. And I'm doing a lot of reading, and I'm talking to some really interesting people. And I really, really believe that preparing for death and thinking about death does help you live. Yeah. It makes you focus on living and living intentionally. So it's very similar. And I guess that was like a near-death experience, and it brought you closer to life, you know.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah. I took a class in college called Healing, Dying, and Thriving. And we interviewed hospice patients as part of it. It was just fascinating. It was like such an eye-opening experience. It was so good.
Yeah. Okay, in my episode with Hobie Wedler, who's an amazing blind entrepreneur, he is pushing us to move beyond the reliance on our sight and strengthen our connection to our other senses, hearing, touch, and taste. And we talked about judgment. And in part, we talk about this on many episodes because my goal is for people to increase their curiosity and decrease their judgment, because there's so much judgment in our world today. And I think when we reduce judgment and we're curious, we increase human connection, which we all need more of. So for women who have hard charging jobs, have to be away from their families, or are what we might call like the default man, the person who's providing for the family, gone more of the time, what do you have to say to people who don't understand the choices you've made? And how do you have those conversations with your kids?
Yeah. I think our kids are watching us all the time, and they're taking cues. And if we are truly happy, then when other people say things, it doesn't equate to them.
Yeah.
They're like, but my mom's happy and we're happy. So what is this person saying? But if you're miserable and unhappy and you're bringing that home, and then other people say something, it has a place to land.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, oh, well, why? I don't want to take advice from my mom. Like, she's miserable and everybody says she's crazy, and, like that kind of stuff. And so I think that's why being self-aware and having that self-love and just being so sure of what you're doing and ecstatic and happy about it, and saying like, yeah, I'm sad that I missed this event with you, but look what I get to do.
Yeah.
Like, I got to, I went to Africa to climb that mountain, and I came back. I told the kids, I'm like, we just put 400 women in school for 4 years with period products. And we didn't even know that was a problem. And look at what we can do. And so I'm sad I missed your play, but let's watch it together on this phone.
Yeah.
And let them understand like, oh, wow, there's more than me in this world. Yeah. And that's okay.
I also think, because I didn't go climb mountains, but I was away from home a lot, traveling for work. And there were definitely people, even in my own family, who judged me for the decisions that I made. I think in our society, it's just women get that more than men.
Well, it's easy. It's easy to judge. It's hard to be curious.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to do a lot of work on it personally, because I had a lot of guilt and, am I doing the right thing? But what I came to realize with time, and I think a lot of things we need time to realize things, is that it's what you were saying. Like, if I'm not happy, then my kids know that. If I'm not fulfilled in what I'm doing, my kids know that. So it's hard. It's hard when the world is judging you and society is judging you, but you still have to push against it and do what's right for you and for your family. And I think it's way easier said than done.
Oh, totally. And then finding your tribe, right? Yeah. Like understanding like, hey, it's going to be hard. It's not ever not going to be hard. It's going to manifest some way. And then having that support system being like, this is hard. Can you help me through this moment?
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard too. And a lot of us have trouble asking for that.
We do, until I think, I was bad at it, but it's something that is an important skill. I mean, I was struggling something yesterday and I was like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And then I got into that, who can help me?
Yeah.
Right. And the faster you can go from how to who, the more like you get to enjoy life and have other people be a part of the journey and get the thing done.
Yeah. And some of it is relying on yourself.
Yeah.
And believing that you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that takes time.
It does. And it takes proof. Like when you relied on yourself before, it worked out. So I can do it again.
Yeah. Okay. What do you love about motivational speaking? You have really good energy and positivity, and I'm also guessing you get a lot from the crowd. Like a lot of times when you give, you get, but I wanted to hear a little bit about that because I don't know any motivational speakers other than you.
Woo! Yes. No, I didn't know if I was going to like it or not, to be honest with you. And then you get up there and there's such an energy exchange, right? And you watch the audience and you see these little brains clicking or understanding or the heads nodding. And you're like, okay, this is good. Like we're moving. And then you get a message afterwards of somebody that asked somebody to help and lighten their load. And you just get the stories after the fact. And those stories, I'm such a sucker for progress. I'm like, I could hold on to that little morsel of whatever for like months. I'm like,
Yeah.
we're still going. We're good. But yeah, no, it's definitely, you get what you give.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you climbed Kilimanjaro. You haven't decided what's next. Do you think you'll keep climbing for fun?
I mean, I actually am going to take another group to Kilimanjaro that's interested in going. So sharing that passion with others.
Mhm.
And I definitely come in, like we did Kilimanjaro pretty hoity-toity, to say the least. The kids had cots and could walk into their tents. They didn't have to crawl into them. So just blending that for people, because I do feel at some level we're kind of over the put me in a room and preach to me. Like, let me have the experiential piece of it and let me embody that and feel it, because it becomes a different layer of wisdom. And so I see myself doing a lot more of that as well.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
we'll see.
Okay. Of all the people that I know, you're on the go more than anybody else. How do you stay grounded and centered with all the travel and activity in your life? And it's not just the travel and activity. You have motivational speaking, you go on TV shows, you go climb mountains, it's all these different activities as well.
Yeah. It's a game to me, right? Like, I don't think of it as it's not stressful. It's fun. It's purposeful. I mean, sure, maybe there's moments of stress, but then I just remind myself, I'm like, I get to do this.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So if I want to make this hell, I can, but why? And so I just have to catch myself and pivot that thought.
So you talked in the beginning about going on a yoga retreat. Do you do yoga regularly? Like, do you find, I mean, even for me, and you might not have this, like even a little bit of travel, like kind of exhausts me.
Mm-hmm.
And I need some time to kind of recuperate from it. So do you need that, or maybe you just don't need that?
I don't know. Like, I do a lot of breath work, and I'm actually in the process of being breath work certified.
Oh, okay.
Because I feel like that has really shifted things for me. I know the cold plunges are like all the rage right now, but when you're traveling and it's 4:00 and you want to go to bed, if you take a cold plunge, you're hacking your system of a whole bunch of adrenaline to drop, and it buys you 4 more hours. And so it's easier to get onto your schedule again.
Yeah.
So I'm always just, okay, what do I want to do? What is my body needing? And then figuring that out.
Okay.
And sometimes it's shocking the system so it gets that adrenaline bump to keep going.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's just really slowing down and breathing to connect to what's happening now and letting a whole bunch of stories in my head fall away.
How did you find the breath work?
I got into breath work because I wanted to be better on the mountain. And I knew that controlling your nervous system through breath would control my thoughts. Mm. And so it's very much like when you start getting scared or whatever, you start going breathing. Well, then that like perpetuates the problem. So when you start getting scared, it's how do you slow down and how do you mellow yourself out? And that was one of the big reasons why I got into it. And it's been a game changer.
So I'm guessing there are lots of like different modalities for breath work. So how did you choose which one that you wanted to get certified in?
I mean, I have to pick different ones to keep my brain entertained, if I had to be honest with you. But the one that has been able to stabilize me the most, it's this 21-minute breath work. So it's like quick enough. You can do it easy throughout the day. And the first 8 minutes I resist it the entire first 8 minutes. I'm like, I should be doing something else. This is boring. Why am I taking the time to do this? I don't have the time to do this. Like all the story. For some reason at 8 minutes, that story disappears because you've gotten into the rhythm of the breath work. And then that 21 minutes comes so fast, you don't even know it hit you. So that's the one I really like.
It sort of sounds like a combination of meditation and breath work.
It is. It is. I think you get so entranced in the breath that you get into a meditative state and then you reset.
Okay.
But when I'm climbing, I'll call it bee breath.
Okay.
So you'll buzz like a bee, you'll go bzzz,
okay.
And that humming keeps like your little lung pockets open. And so then it helps you do an oxygen exchange better, because as you start getting in less oxygenated environments, your body wants to get more tense. And it's truly in relaxing that you can get more oxygen in.
Okay.
And so that buzzing keeps things open and helps you do the oxygen exchange better.
Fascinating.
It's fascinating.
This sounds like your next book.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Speaking of that, what drove you to write the book? Do you think it's a way you can most effectively convey the messages that you want to convey to people? And what do you most hope to teach, and who do you most hope to reach?
Yeah. I had no intention of writing a book when I started this thing, but I have a neighbor that is the CEO of Franklin Covey. So they 2 books and speakers and all that kind of stuff. So he kind of planted the seed. And for me, it was interesting how much building a business like I had done before and climbing a mountain had parallels. And then I thought, well, the nice thing about climbing a mountain, it's very black and white. And in business, it's a lot more gray.
Yeah.
So if you can see it in the black and white, then it helps you identify it in the gray a little bit easier. So I thought, you know what, I do have a message to share that would benefit others. And it allows people to see that I've organized my thoughts. I thought through things. So when they hire me to speak or talk to them about teams or work with their company, it gives them some kind of credibility of, okay, we know what we're going to get.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I hope to inspire anybody who is taking on a new pursuit or has something in them that they haven't like turned the key over on.
Mm-hmm.
And then also working with teams. It's really fun getting into an organization. I'm working with a bank right now and saying, okay, structurally, do we have the right people to climb this mountain? And what role is everybody playing? And how do we get to the top? And how do we say, I need a break?
Yeah. Was it an enjoyable process to write it, or was it stressful?
No, it's horrible. Like writing a book is horrible because it would be like doing a podcast by yourself with nobody else in the room to give you any feedback. So you don't understand, like if you're writing a story, are you getting into too much detail? Are you not getting into enough detail? Is it too much jargon so the normal person doesn't even know what you're talking about? Do you have a pace? I mean, when you're writing a book, you're writing a long song. And so that song has to have those punchy parts and the slow parts, and I metabolize it. And then you have questions, which is a speed bump. And so it slows the reader down. And are they ready to be slowed down? Or are they in this pace where they want to keep going? And so there's so much to it that you don't think about.
Yeah.
And so when you start doing it, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah.
But then you start piecing it together and the flow starts to show up.
Cool.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's pretty cool.
Write a book. Have fun.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see about that. What question have I not asked you that I should have asked you, or that you want to share?
Oh, you asked me a lot of great questions today. Let's not add some more questions.
Okay, well, I like to talk a little bit about my company, Amatond, which is an elevated everyday tableware brand. Normally, I send guests products before we record. You actually are my first guest in my studio, in my warehouse. So we did have a chance to walk the warehouse, and you're going to take a few things home with you.
Yeah.
And so we'll hear more about them later. But you're going to take our blue leather journal, which is so beautiful. I love the color. And I also love that you can change out the inserts because sometimes you don't want to throw away what you've written. And then also you don't want to throw away the leather. So, so I love that. And then you're also taking a beautiful piece that Dylan and I designed that has a leather base and a wooden insert that can be used separately or together you could put drinks on it. You could put just beautiful objects on it, lots of different things. So you can use it for appetizers. So it has lots of different uses. Mm-hmm. And then a few of our ceramic appetizer bowls, which are hand thrown in Utah.
Ooh.
And dishwasher safe. They're like, I call them the Goldilocks bowl. They're not too big and they're not too small. So I look forward to you getting to use them and to give us feedback, particularly because we design most of our products, so we can iterate on them in the future, which is super helpful to get feedback. Mm-hmm. And then I love to end every episode with the same 5 questions of all my guests.
Yeah.
So my first question is, as we explore in my brand Amatond, objects can hold a lot of meaning for us. They can tie us to the past, enable us to be in the present more, or even take us into the future. Can you share an object from your life, whether you still have it or not, that has a lot of meaning for you, and tell us why?
Yeah. So I have two. One is when we were growing up, we got a Christmas ornament every year from my grandma. And it's fun to look back at those ornaments and see like what I was interested in or what was going on at the time or what was cool. They really tell a story of your past. So I think that's a really fun family tradition of something I'm glad I've kept. But the reason why I grabbed like that serving platter is because my grandma had one. I didn't inherit it, but that's okay. But I remember like that was like every time that was the one that she put the fruit on. Right. And I can remember her cutting the fruit up, and I can remember her like, cause she would always put it into cute little designs or flowers or whatever like grandmas can do. And that's why I grabbed a platter like that, because at any time we can start that own tradition in our own houses and just be like, oh, mom brings this out and that means this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And there's some comfort to that routine.
I mean, and it's so crazy how objects, like memories are imbued within objects.
Yes.
I think it's astonishing. It's also true with smells, with certain smells, which is really interesting as well.
Very much so.
Well, talking about traditions, can you share a favorite tradition with us? It could be something from when you were a child or something that you do with your kids today. Could revolve around food or travel or whatever.
So this is going to be your next product, unless you already have it. I don't have it right now. Is every birthday, we have the same birthday cake, and we do birthday cake for breakfast. So
have I had this? Is it the chocolate cake?
Yes, you've had it. It's magic, right? And so if you had a really pretty cake platter, that would be us, and we'd use it for every birthday. But I think just having that, like, cake for breakfast is a fun thing for my kids, and it's a fun thing as an adult. So keep it going.
That's so fun. Well, it's funny. We actually have designed several cake platters. We've not produced them yet because we were trying to find the right producer. And we've been going back and forth whether we do ceramic or glass. Do you have thoughts?
So I have a ceramic like stand, so it lifts it up and gives it some beauty. But then we have a glass dome that goes that doesn't like have to mesh with the stand. It goes straight onto the countertop.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Which is nice because everyone that has always tried to mesh with the stand, you're trying to line it up and you crack it because you hit it funny.
Yeah.
And so the one that we bought goes glass like all the way over it to the countertop. And that has been lasting the longest.
Okay.
So that's something to keep in mind.
Definitely. Okay. We have a couple cool shapes we're working with. So
I like it.
So that's in the works. Okay. Are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not?
Yes and no. So I host a bunch of like fun type events. I don't host any big dinners right now because there's just too many kids at the house and I don't want to get it clean for that. But we'll grill out and have families over after a sporting event or things like that. So I'm more of the cocktail table, like setup things, have a whole bunch of finger foods. Yeah.
And have you always enjoyed having people? Or not?
I have people all the time. I have 7 children. There's never not people. Like one of my kids went on a vacation with somebody and they only had 2 kids. And so my son was the third and he's like, Mom, they just sit and eat dinner. Like there's nothing crazy ever that goes on. It's just everything's the same. And I'm like, yeah, that is not your story. It was just so funny for him to notice.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have 1 or 2 top resources? Books, websites, courses, podcasts, your podcast that you can recommend to listeners?
Yeah. I read this book called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. He was a Harvard professor, and he wrote this book because he realized he had all these people coming back for alumni events, and they were divorced or they had all this financial success, but their personal success really wasn't matching. And so he wrote this book about what yardstick are you using to measure success in your life? Mm-hmm. And it's one of those books you can read every so many years and just recalibrate and say, oh, am I following the right metrics?
Yeah.
And how I want to show up and what I want to do. And it really reminds me, it's less about what I achieve and more about how I can help and influence others.
Yeah.
And that's like just helps. And I love that book and I think everybody should read it.
Okay. And tell us about your podcast.
Yeah. So my podcast, Seek Your Summit, I interview people with stories of resilience, right? The setbacks, the pivots, the things that they thought were going to go one way and it ended up another way. And I just think when we share how we navigated these experiences, we learn from each other and it helps us become stronger in our own pursuits. And I'm fascinated by people's stories. I mean, it's amazing. You're like, what? You did, huh? I mean, I'm interviewing a guy that like was this huge tech star that had to go to jail from like a biking accident. I mean, it's crazy.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I agree. I think almost everybody has an interesting story to tell.
Fascinating. Yes.
And we don't hear them enough. We don't listen for them. We don't ask what they are. You know, we sort of generally we stay on the surface.
Yeah. No, and I like to deep dive, and I only do now in-person interviews
interesting.
because I just like the energy exchange and being able to be with the person instead of having the screen between us.
Yeah.
And that's allowed the conversations to get more authentic and deeper.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you do for yourself? We talked a little bit about this before. You talked about the breath work. So that may be what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or a daily routine that contributes to your success or well-being?
I use an alarm on my phone. You know how you have those alarms?
Mm-hmm.
And on the alarms, you can label them. Mm-hmm. And so I will do a label at 10 p.m. that says super sleeper. And it reminds me that at 10 p.m. I need to go to bed because otherwise I can be doomsday scrolling and like go forever. And at 3 o'clock, it says magnificent mom. And that alarm just reminds me that this is my time to be a great mom. Before I was in work mode or I was in workout mode or whatever. And those little alarms, like just give me that trigger of what's my avatar for this next period of time to show up the way that I want to show up.
How many alarms do you have?
It depends on what, like on vacation, they all go away. Like this is vacation mode. But I mean, I probably have 4 or 5.
Okay.
It's just a check-in. It's a pause. It's okay, am I showing up like the role that I need to play for this next bit of time?
Yeah. Well, before we wrap, we haven't talked at all really about your 7 children. So can you just talk a little bit about, I mean, I guess here in Utah, people do have big families, but I don't know anybody else with 7 children. So can you just talk a minute about how like beautiful and messy and crazy, I'm sure that is.
Oh my God. What a gift.
Yeah.
I'll tell you. I mean, we were just on spring break and one of my kids goes, and he goes, you know what, Mom? We are the luckiest family. Everybody loves being around our family because there's just so much energy and so much love. And my kids, I mean, I struggled with fertility. And so it's funny because no one would guess that based on having 7 kids. But because I struggled, I went through fertility treatments. I had embryos. I viewed them as life and I used them till they were gone. And so, you know, if I would have done it a different way, I probably would have had 2, maybe 3 kids. I have 7. Every one of them is entirely different. And it's just so fun to witness the world through their lens.
Yeah.
Right? Like what excites them, what they think about, how their progression goes from A, B, C, or D. And every idea in my house is crowdfunded. Okay. So your kid might take a pillowcase and go down the staircase. By the time that gets matriculated into my house, I mean, they're jumping off a balcony to land on a sofa, right? I mean, like it's amazing what happens. But when ideas get crowned, I mean, it's just fun. I mean, it's total crazy. There's always something, but I can't imagine my life another way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I don't know if you found out the genders beforehand or anything, and I did with my 2 boys. And I feel like it's a surprise whenever you find out.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have all of these like hopes and dreams about what it will be. And it is a magical, frustrating, difficult, joyous journey. And I guess coming back to like the messy middle and having it be the journey, like it really is, the beauty is in the journey. Mm-hmm. It's not in any outcome. And for me, at least, like, trying to let go of outcomes is extremely powerful and helpful.
Yeah. When you have 7, it forces you to let go of outcomes. So like, you're just like, well, this is where we're at. So let's sit through this and figure out what we're doing. But yeah, no, it's great.
Well, Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Jenn. It's been amazing.
Thank you.
I am really excited to see what you do next when your winter is over.
Yes.
I'm sure there will be summer and spring
Yes.
that will last a long time too. So you'll have to come back and talk about that. And maybe it will be your next book on breathwork.
Woohoo! I like it. It's put into the universe.
Thanks for listening to an episode of On the Table with Ashley. Subscribing to, rating, and reviewing our podcast helps us to continue to record great interviews. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're interested in learning more about the products we talked about on the show, visit amattendre.com. That's AMEATENDRE.com to check them out. When you become a member by sharing your email on our website, we'll share special discounts that relate to products discussed on each episode. Finally, email us at reachoutanytime@amattendre.com with thoughts you have or ideas for topics or guests for future episodes. Thanks for listening.